I want to start this video off with a very simple question, and that is, how many people out there understand why we use these pieces of paper as our medium of exchange or money? Most people don't understand why we use pieces of paper, these banknotes, for money because they don't study monetary history. Back before the creation of money, there was a very difficult time to try to put value to things. People had their property, their ownership of their possessions, but to place a value on those possessions was very difficult because people wanted to trade with one another. Somebody would have something that somebody else would want, and the other person that they wanted to trade with wouldn't have anything that the other person would want. So there would be difficulty in trying to place value on different things, especially if they were trying to trade, say, a big item for some kind of a small item. There was a difference in value, and so the trade would not happen. So what needed to be done was there needed to be a medium of exchange to make trading easier. This is why the creation of money was invented, because when two people want to trade with one another, or if one person wants something that another person has, but that person doesn't have anything that the person who wants to trade with them wants, then they can't do the trade. But if there was a medium of exchange that the person could give to that other person for the item that they want, and then they could take that medium of exchange to another person, and they could trade that for an item that they have that they want. That made trading easier between people. That's why money was invented. Money was invented to make trading easier amongst people. It was never invented to become this business cycle, employer, employee, marketplace, monetary system that we are all in today. It was never intended to be that. It turned into that because of the constant bombardment with deceptionary movement in the monetary system by the central banks that control the monetary system or the medium of exchange that we all use. Before we started using paper as money, we used gold and silver coins. And what the problem that happened with this is that there would be hoarding of gold and silver coins. The central banks would hoard gold and silver coins, and they would make it scarce amongst the people, and this would create many problems. It would create scarcity, it would create poverty, it created a lot of misery because people just didn't have any way of doing trades with one another because there wasn't enough supply of gold and silver coins. So during the revolution of 1776, they came up with using a non interest fiat currency called colonial script. And the reason that that didn't work is because it was inflated to the point where the trade value that it had was next to nothing. They printed too many of these colonial script documents, or banknote documents, that flooded into the into the monetary system and made the trade value of it worthless. So in order to fix this problem, what was created was these gold and silver certificates, which was what the banks would hand out in exchange for depositing gold or silver into the banks or into the treasury. That's why on all of these certificates, if you look at them, they all say this certifies that there has been deposited in the treasury of the United States of America $10 in gold coin payable to the bearer on demand. This is what gave our money at that time value, because you could go to any federal bank and give him this certificate, and they would give you the gold coins that the certificate represented. It would tell you where it would be, how much it was, and who it was going to be paid to. And that's what these numbers in the corners of the banknotes represented. Like this is the very first early silver dollar from 1899, and this represented one silver dollar coin. So it says right here, this certifies that there has been deposited in the Treasury of the United States of America one silver dollar, payable to the bearer on demand. So that's what gave our money value, is that you can go and exchange it for gold and silver. And over time, what happened is they decided to hoard gold and silver, or the gold certificates and gold coins as well. Back in 1933, the president gave an executive order to everybody in the United States to turn in their gold and silver certificate, their gold, not silver, their gold coins and their their gold coins and their gold certificates. And if you see down here, it says criminal penalties for violation of executive order: $10,000 fine or 10 years imprisonment. So that's what they were threatening the general public with if they did not turn in their gold and coins and their gold certificates. This was the government's way of hoarding gold and gold coins and gold certificates during that time. And they slowly started to replace these certificates with Federal Reserve notes. And that's what we have today. Instead of it saying silver certificate or gold and silver certificate payable to the bearer on demand, nowadays all we have are just regular Federal Reserve notes that don't say payable to the bearer on demand. It doesn't say anything of the such. It doesn't say deposited in the treasury. It just says the United States of America, $10, and that's it. It doesn't represent anything of value. It's not redeemable for anything. You can't go to a bank and exchange it for anything of intrinsic value anymore. And that's what's happened to our monetary system today. It has turned into a fiat currency that has no value to it. These certificates have a value to them, but the Federal Reserve notes that we use today do not, because you cannot go redeem any gold or silver coins for them. And if you look at the confiscation document, it says that you must deliver on or before May 1st, 1933, all gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates. And if we look up the definition of deliver, we notice that right in here it says surrender. Surrender someone or something. To deliver up or just... So if we click on the surrender and we look at the definition of surrender, give up or hand over the right or possession that's demanded by someone. So they're not just handing over their gold coins and gold certificates to the government and getting a certificate or getting something in response that they made a deposit. No, they're surrendering it to the Federal Reserve and or the federal government, or to the federal banks. So that means that they were forcing the general public to willingly give up their gold to the federal banks. And so they didn't have any ownership of it anymore. And they were trying to, at the time, they were trying to tell the people that this would unite the country's wealth all into one medium of exchange system. But then they took the value of it away and they turned that into Federal Reserve notes. So now, currently today, we have these Federal Reserve notes that do not claim that anything has been deposited. You cannot there's nothing that it says on these documents that is payable to anybody. All these documents say is Federal Reserve note, United States of America, $20, Federal Reserve note. It doesn't say anything but the 20 is supposed to represent. It doesn't say that you can go and redeem anything that this document represents. It doesn't represent anything. So because this piece of paper doesn't represent anything, that means that it has no value to it. The only reason that it has value is because back in 1930, 1933, we had these gold and silver certificates. These had value because you can go and get your gold and silver coins from the federal banks by giving them these certificates. But since these are not being used anymore and they were taken out of circulation and replaced by these, that took the value away from them. So we were used to, we started out as using banknotes that had value to them because they were exchangeable for something with intrinsic value, the gold and silver, which is what we used as money. But when they exchanged them out for these Federal Reserve notes, that value went away, and we have not been trading with anything of value as a medium of exchange ever since then. So we can understand to this very day why people at large do not understand how to put a value to something, because our medium of exchange that we are using is not linked to anything of value. Therefore, it is very difficult to learn the value of actual products and property, because these banknotes that we use to trade for those products and property don't have any value to them. If these banknote documents still had value to them like these gold and silver certificates did, like we have one silver dollar here, 20 silver dollars here, or this 20 silver dollar banknote actually represents $20 in gold coins, which was 1 ounce gold coin during that time when these banknotes were first put into circulation. So it was a lot easier to understand the value of things, because when you trade a $20 gold certificate for something, the person who's receiving that understands that that 20 in the corner of the banknote represents $20 in gold coins, or one silver dollar coin. So these numbers in the corners of these banknotes represented silver dollars, and a 20 silver dollars would equal the value of 1 ounce gold coin, and $100 bill would equal the value of 100 silver dollars, or 5 ounce gold coins. And that's how they distributed the value of these certificates back during the 1930s, 1920s. But when the Great Depression happened, that's when the Federal Reserve, the central bank of the United States, decided to tighten the money supply. They had the capability of not only printing these certificates at will, but they were stuck in the controlled system where these banknotes had to represent a certain amount of gold that they had in their depository. If they didn't have the gold, they couldn't print any more of these banknotes. So what they did is they started to tighten the money supply to make money scarce, and that's what caused the Great Depression. Is they made these banknotes very scarce, and people began to valuing just having these pieces of paper in their possession versus what these pieces of paper were supposed to represent. And once that mindset got burnt into the general public's minds, that they wanted these pieces of paper, the demand for these pieces of paper and not for what they were supposed to represent, that's when they started switching over into Federal Reserve notes, where these pieces of paper do no longer say they represent gold and silver coins. It just says Federal Reserve note, United States of America, $5,000. The 5,000 was supposed to represent 5,000 silver dollar coins, and you could supposed to redeem this at any federal bank and get those silver dollar coins. But because now it's just a number and a title, as in dollar, or the silver dollar represented a silver dollar coin, but now the word dollar is just a title for these pieces of paper. They no longer represent what a silver dollar was and what these banknotes were supposed to represent and have value to them. This is why nobody in our modern day can understand the true value of what they own and the true value of what they buy in the marketplace, because these banknotes don't represent anything of value. If you use a medium of exchange that doesn't represent anything of value, then you have no way of learning the value of things. You see, if these banknotes had a fixed value, if the $1 Federal Reserve note dollar had a fixed value to it, and then you would take these banknotes that had a fixed value and you would trade them for something with a matching value to them. That's what this was, marketplace and monetary system was supposed to be. But they took control. The Federal Reserve took control of the monetary system by putting these Federal Reserve notes into circulation instead of gold and silver certificates. And they did this. They weren't able to do this alone. They had help by the Treasury. The only way they could tighten the money supply and take all the gold and silver certificates out of circulation and put in these Federal Reserve notes is by working out a monetary exchange with the Federal Reserve and the United States Treasury. So how the Federal Reserve and the Treasury did this is the Treasury would make up their own design of a piece of paper that had a number value to it, but the number value to it was representing Federal Reserve notes instead of gold and silver coins. So the Federal Reserve would have a monopoly over printing Federal Reserve notes, and in order to get those Federal Reserve notes into circulation, they had the Treasury make up these bonds for a specific amount of Federal Reserve note dollars. Treasury note, 500 million Federal Reserve note dollars. So they would take this bond, the Treasury would print out this piece of paper which represents 5 million Federal Reserve note dollars. They would give it to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve would then give the Treasury 500 million Federal Reserve note dollars, 500 million of these, and the Treasury would then now spend these Federal Reserve notes into the economy to government employees, public works. They would pay anybody that was working for the government these Federal Reserve notes once they got them from the Federal Reserve for trading these bonds for them. So the Treasury and the Federal Reserve would do a paper swap. This piece of paper would represent 500 million of these, and the Treasury would get 500 million of these. The Federal Reserve would get this piece of paper right here that said 500 million on it, and they would trade these pieces of paper with one another. And the Federal Reserve would hang on to these and collect interest on it. Now, the problem is the interest amount that this bond represents that needs to be paid back when this bond expires. Every single bond has an expiration date. And when it expires, the 500 million Federal Reserve notes must be paid back to the Federal Reserve along with whatever interest is listed on the bond. Now, the first time they did this, when they traded this one bond for all those Federal Reserve notes, in order to give all the 500 million Federal Reserve notes back, including the interest, they had to create another bond for whatever the interest payment was, and they had to trade that bond to the Federal Reserve to get the Federal Reserve notes in order to pay the Federal Reserve the interest that they charged for hanging on to this bond for a certain amount of time. So this is what caused our government to get into perpetual debt because there is no way to pay off the interest without trading with the Federal Reserve another bond for more Federal Reserve notes in order to pay off the interest of the bond that had just expired. So the government is in this constant monetary loop where it's constantly trading bonds for Federal Reserve notes to be able to pay not only the government workers their their payroll money, but then they would have to trade back the Federal Reserve notes, and in order to still have money in the money supply, they had to do another paper exchange. They had to create another bond and trade for more Federal Reserve notes in order to pay off the interest and keep the monetary system going. If if all of the Treasury bonds all expired and all of the Federal Reserve notes were paid back to the Federal Reserve, then there wouldn't be any Federal Reserve notes in circulation. There would be no medium of exchange anymore. And that's when the monetary system would collapse. And this is why we are always being put into perpetual debt, and why the debt ceiling is constantly being raised, or they suspended the debt ceiling like indefinitely, so that we have no more debt ceiling. So now the Treasury can keep borrowing as much as they want, or keep trading these bonds for as much Federal Reserve notes as they want with no limit to it. And there's no value to any of this. These numbers don't represent anything. If these numbers represented something of value, then these would have value to them, but they don't. So we are all using a brainwashed medium of exchange monetary system that has no value to it, and as long as we keep doing this with our money, we will never have a honest and true marketplace medium of exchange monetary system for the general public to use. And this is the problem with our monetary system to this very day. Okay, so in conclusion of this video, I wanted to go over a solution I had for the monetary system problems that we have today. And I came up with this chart that I made a video for a while back, showing how you could link grams of silver to one Federal Reserve note dollar, and you could also link a $100 Federal Reserve note to 100 grams of silver. And by linking our money to grams of silver like this, we could then price these other metals in 1 ounce measurement weight amounts to the price that they currently are at in Federal Reserve note dollars, but then we could supplement those for grams of silver. And if 1 gram of gold would be equal to 100 grams of silver, then we could take the value of these in silver and exchange them for a certain amount of ounces of each metal for the value of 1 gram of silver. Like this, for example, zinc its value at 1 ounce would be 14 grams of silver. So if you took 7 ounces of zinc at 14 grams of silver per ounce of zinc, that would equal 98 grams of silver, or 98 Federal Reserve note dollars. And if you added just 2 grams of silver more, that would equal 100 grams, or the value of 1 gram of gold. And I did this with each one of these metals. Like the value of 1 gram of platinum is equal to 50 Federal Reserve note dollars, or 50 grams of silver. So only 2 grams of platinum would equal the value of 1 gram of gold. So if we did this with all these other metals, if we valued them in grams of silver as well as Federal Reserve notes, then we could exchange them for 1 gram of gold by filling in grams of silver or Federal Reserve notes as the value differential for gold. See, so this would be a way to create price tags for all products and services, not just in Federal Reserve notes like we have today, but we could price tag our products and services in grams of silver and in ounces of these other metals, and to fill in the differential for $100 Federal Reserve note. For 100 Federal Reserve note dollar or 100 grams of silver, you would just fill in the differential, the certain amount of ounces of each metal with the differential of grams of silver or Federal Reserve note dollars. So I know that because we have used the Federal Reserve note system for so long that we can't just throw out all the Federal Reserve notes and go right into a new monetary system like this all in one swoop. We have to slowly migrate the Federal Reserve notes out of the system and slowly migrate these uh, uh, metals and their values into the system by having price tags right next to the Federal Reserve note dollars. You'd price tag your goods and services in Federal Reserve notes, grams of silver, ounces of these other metals, and you would fill in the value differential for 1 gram of gold or for 100 Federal Reserve note dollars in with grams of silver or Federal Reserve notes. Like this one would take cobalt at 17 grams of silver or 17 Federal Reserve note dollars in value for 1 ounce of cobalt. You would need 5 ounces of cobalt plus 15 grams of silver or 15 Federal Reserve note dollars to make the value of 1 gram of gold. This would allow everyone to use 1 gram of gold as if it were a $100 bill, Federal Reserve note dollar bill, and be able to make change in any one of these metals or silver or Federal Reserve notes if they wish to keep using a fiat currency that has no value to it. You see, I believe if we started using these metals as our medium of exchange, people would realize very quickly that the Federal Reserve note isn't linked to anything of value. And I believe that they would start naturally just not using them anymore because they would understand that these metals have value and those pieces of paper that say dollar on them don't. So this is my solution to our monetary problems that we have today, and it would be a slow migration out of the Federal Reserve note system into this new monetary system that I came up with, but it would be a long process, and I don't know what kind of results would happen from that. It could make more poverty, it could make more misery, but in the end we would have something of true value that we could use to trade with, and that would teach everybody the true value of their property and possessions. Because we would have a monetary system that had a linked value to it, and that linked value would teach people what the true value of their property and products were, and services as well. So that is my video on a brief look at monetary history, the problems that we have in our monetary system today, and the solution I came up with to fix the monetary problems that we have. And I thank you for watching, and have a good day.